The town of Bitter Ridge lived up to its name. A thin haze of dust hovered in the streets, settling on cracked windows, worn boots, and rusted signs that creaked with every desert gust. It was a place that barely held itself together, tied with the grit of its people and the secrets they carried. Jake Mercer rode into town with the sun beating down on his battered hat. His stallion, Whiskey, snorted tiredly as they reached the livery stable. Jake dismounted, his boots kicking up dirt, and handed the reins to a boy with eyes too old for his face. He nodded once and made his way to the saloon. It had been 3 years since Jake left Bitter Ridge. 3 years since the U.S. Army ambush in Apache camp, and he'd found his heart lying in the arms of an enemy, an Apache woman named Sani. She'd saved his life that day, and then she vanished. Jake never forgot her, and though the war between settlers and the Apache still simmered on the edges of the territory, something had drawn him back here. Some whisper of unfinished business. Something deeper than vengeance. Maybe forgiveness. Chapter 2. The Woman with Fire in Her Eyes. Sani watched from the shadows of the dry goods store as Jake Mercer dismounted. Her heart pounded as her fingers tightened on the folds of her shawl. She hadn't expected to see him again, least of all here, in this hostile, broken place where white men only looked at her with suspicion or worse. She was no longer the fierce scout who had stolen a wounded cowboy from the jaws of death. Life had worn her down since then. Her people had scattered, her tribe hunted, and her sister taken as prisoner months ago. Sani had come to Bitter Ridge only because she heard whispers of her sister being sold to a ranch on the outskirts. But now, Jake. Memories flooded her. The night she'd cleaned the blood from his wounds, fed him wild roots and smoked deer meat. How he'd looked at her like she was more than just Apache, more than just a symbol of a war. And how she'd fled before the soldiers came, before he could be forced to choose between her life or his. She stepped forward as he left the saloon later that evening, torchlight from the porch flickering across his jaw. Jake Mercer, she called softly, her voice shaking like distant thunder. He turned. Their eyes locked. "Sani," he breathed. She stepped closer, head bowed. "Have mercy, please. I can give you a child if you forgive me." His brows furrowed. "What are you saying, Sani?" She looked up, fierce and trembling. "I carry your child." Chapter 3. Truth and Fire. Jake stared at her as if he'd seen a ghost. His hands, once calm, trembled by his sides. "You said nothing," he whispered. "You left. You were gone when I returned to the canyon." Sani swallowed hard. "I thought you'd die. I ran to lead the soldiers away." He remembered that night, barely, feverish, fading, then waking days later in a Comanche trader's camp with no sign of her. He'd ridden back to the canyon. All he found was ash and blood. "And now," he asked, voice hollow, "you tell me this here, in a town that would sooner string you up than listen to your name." "I had no choice." Her voice cracked. "My sister was taken. I need help finding her. I came for that. I didn't mean to find you." Jake's jaw clenched. His past was tangled with violence and guilt, but he wasn't heartless. Not to her. "You're carrying my child," he repeated. Sani hesitated and shook her head slowly. "No, not now. I lost a child that winter." Jake's breath caught. She had lied. But why? She stepped closer, tears forming. "I said it because I didn't know if you'd listen otherwise. But I did love you, and I do need your help." Silence fell between them as dust swirled around their feet. Jake looked away, the pain fresh, sharp as a spur. Finally, he spoke. "I'll help you, but not because of lies. Because I owe you, and because I still care, damn me." Chapter 4. The Road to Redemption. They rode out the next morning under a pale sun, headed toward the ranch of Elias Boone, a man known for buying labor and selling secrets. Jake had known Boone in another life, a gambler and cattle thief turned respectable rancher. If Sani's sister had been sold anywhere in Bitter Ridge, it would have been to him. Jake and Sani barely spoke as the desert stretched around them, but there was a comfort in the silence. At camp that night, Jake handed her a tin cup of coffee. She took it, her fingers brushing his. "Why did you come back to Bitter Ridge?" she asked. He stared into the fire. "Because I couldn't forget you." She didn't respond. She only stared at the flames with eyes filled with ghosts. Chapter 5. The Rancher Wolves. Elias Boone greeted them with a sneer behind his smoke-stained mustache. He stood on his porch, rifle in one hand, silver pocket watch in the other. Well, Jake Mercer. Didn't think you had the spine to come back here." Jake nodded towards Sani. "She's looking for her sister." Boone's eye settled on Sani like a vulture to carrion. "Ain't seen no Apache girl around here." Sani stepped forward. "Please. Her name is Nali. She has a scar on her left hand from a branding iron. She was taken in the spring." Boone chuckled. "Lot of girls come and go. Maybe she was here. Maybe she ain't." Jake saw the twitch in Boone's eye. He was lying. "Then maybe you won't mind if we take a look around," Jake said coolly. "That ain't gonna happen." Boone whistled, and 5 men stepped from the barn with rifles drawn. "You best leave before you find trouble, Mercer." Jake glanced at Sani. Her face was pale but steady. "We'll be back," Jake growled. Boone laughed. "Not without a coffin. You won't." Chapter 6. Firefight at Bitter Ridge. That night, Jake and Sani returned with fire in their hearts and strategy in their saddlebags. They waited until the moon was high, shadows long. Jake snuck around the barn while Sani crawled through the sagebrush toward the slave quarters Boone kept locked. Gunshots cracked as Jake opened fire on the guards. Chaos exploded like thunder through the desert night. Sani picked the lock with shaking hands, whispering her sister's name. From the dark, a frail voice answered, "Sani." Nali emerged, eyes wide and wild. She threw herself into Sani's arms just as more shots rang out. Jake stumbled into the clearing, bleeding from the shoulder. "We've got to go." Together, they rode into the darkness, bullets chasing their heels, freedom just beyond the ridgeline. Chapter 7. What Love Endures. They made it to a safe canyon by dawn. Jake collapsed from blood loss, and Sani tended to him just as she had years ago. Her hands steady, her voice low. "You're a fool," she whispered, stitching his wound. "A brave, stubborn fool." He chuckled weakly. "Takes one to know one." Days passed in the canyon. Nali regained strength, and Jake healed. But something else mended too, slowly, quietly. One morning, as the sun warmed the rocks, Sani sat beside Jake. "I'm sorry I lied," she said. He turned to her. "You said it because you were desperate. I don't blame you." She hesitated. "I wasn't lying about the love." Jake reached for her hand. "Neither was I." Chapter 8. A New Beginning. They returned to Bitter Ridge not as fugitives, but as a family. With Nali safe, Jake purchased a small homestead on the outskirts of town where he and Sani could start anew. Whispers still followed them. Apache lover, they called him, and worse. But Jake stood tall, and Sani prouder still.